Question. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous speaker finished slightly before I was anticipating. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to take a call to discuss this procedural motion in what is a relatively new process for the House. I was on the Standing Orders Committee when the committee made the determination that a motion such as this to truncate a select committee process should be a debatable motion. And it was something that the Standing Orders Committee spent quite some time considering because we saw that with many of the new powers that the government was given by that Standing Orders review, including extended sitting and so on, there had to be some trade-offs to that, and this was one of them. Because truncating a select committee process does quite seriously infringe on the rights of members to participate fully in all aspects of the parliamentary process. So what this motion does, for example, is it basically says that if the select committee chair decides to call a meeting of this committee while the House is sitting, and there are items on the order paper being debated in the chamber that a member of that committee wishes to participate in the debate around, they won't be able to. They will be prevented from being able to participate in that debate. Now, the committee can do all of the things that this motion gives them the power to do by consensus. So if the members had decided that actually, there's no good reason why we couldn't meet while the House is sitting because there's nothing on the order paper that we want to particularly, participate in, the committee could decide that for themselves. But what this does is it takes that decision away from the committee and it gives the chair the exclusive power to make that determination, even if other members on the committee want to participate in other proceedings in the House. And I don't think that's right, and it is a significant constraint on the power, on the rights of members to participate in the activities of the House, to represent their constituents and to do the job that we are paid to do. So that's the first point. I think that we need to be really careful when the Parliament, as we are being asked to do now, votes to take away the rights of members. And that's effectively what the government are now asking us to do. This bill is being referred to the Education and Science Select Committee, which I understand from the New Zealand First Member Tracy Martin, who just spoke, works on a relatively collaborative basis and has a few items of business on the agenda that they're dealing with at the moment. But I'm told by my colleague that they don't actually have any other legislation on the agenda at the moment. So they should actually be able to accommodate this if they were given a reasonable timeframe. If they were given a timeframe that wasn't truncated, that was within the 4 months. So the government can shorten the timeframe from 6 months to 4 months without needing to go through this process that they're going through now. And 4 months, given the workload I understand of the Education and Science Select Committee, they should be able to accommodate a robust process within that timeframe if they weren't being forced to rush it through. As I said, if there is a desire to meet outside of Wellington, for example, as this motion gives the committee power to do, the committee can do that through a number of ways. The Business Committee regularly considers requests from select committees to meet outside of Wellington, and I think that we have adopted quite a collaborative approach to dealing with those requests through the Business Committee. We certainly haven't been, the opposition has certainly actually gone out of our way to support many of those committees in meeting outside of Wellington, and I think that that's... And the government...
The National Party wants to destroy that.
That's right, and the government are basically saying, well... we don't want to collaborate with other parties in Parliament. We are just going to ride roughshod over that and do what we want to do. And I actually think that since the standing orders were changed, and this debate, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm taking part in now, was one of the changes made by the Standing Orders Committee. Since those changes were put in place, I think the Business Committee has actually adopted a very collaborative approach to the government's, to assisting the government to achieve the things that it wants to achieve. I mean, we have cooperated with them on extended sitting hours, which is unprecedented. They have gained a huge number of extra sitting hours that they otherwise would have had to use urgency for. And in fact, even if they'd used urgency, they could not have done some of the things that we have done using those new powers for extended sitting, even under urgency, because in some cases the treaty settlements bills are a really good example where we've grouped things up. Well, it is relevant, Mr. Speaker, because it's all part of the trade-off that exists around processes in the House.
Order. Now that this debate is confined to why this should be truncated. We're not talking about trade-offs or decisions around that. And I've been listening very, very carefully, and I just asked the member to speak about the reasons why he's been on track. He then drifted off. I'm asking him to return.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, I was also listening very carefully to the member, and what I would like to put to you is that he was talking about the processes of the House, the new processes of the House, and whether or not we should support those processes being applied to this bill or not. And, Mr. Speaker, what he was pointing out is that those processes are part of a package, and that package includes general cooperation. And so I think what he was saying is that if the government goes down this line, then other cooperation will not be available.
I've heard the member, and I have deemed that to be outside the scope. Cooperation not, but to relitigate the business of the Standing Orders Committee in relation to this is. So I'll just take Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that I'm opposed to truncating the time frame for this is, well, there are two reasons that I want to go into. The first of which is around what that does to the democratic rights of the people who are affected by the bill. And the second is what that does to the functioning of Parliament, particularly around cost. Because, and I'll deal with the second one first, and that is the issue around cost. A truncated process is actually quite an expensive process because consider, for example, travel. If this committee is being given the power to travel, to hear proceedings outside of Wellington at relatively short notice, that is going to be more expensive. They can't book, for example, as my colleague Megan Woods pointed out to me, you can't get grab a seat for many of these things if we don't have sufficient time to plan ahead for those. We can't get the cheapest airfares, for example. So it's not necessarily going to be cheaper. There is cost associated with haste. And my colleague Chris Farfoy pointed out to me earlier on, there is no dignity in haste. Right, yes. And I think that's something that this Parliament should really take into account. Coming back to the first point that I was raising about the risk of a rushed process, and that is that members of the public who are going to be affected by this bill won't have sufficient opportunity to actually have a say in it and to make submissions. So, for example, and I know I'm not allowed to deal with the substance of the bill in this debate, but I think it should be noted that the Establishment Board has a real lack of scientists on it. Now, scientists might have a view on that, and they might want to come to the committee and prepare a considered submission. Can they prepare a considered submission if that committee gets the bill next week, then advertises for submissions, because bearing in mind that the committee probably won't meet till next week to open submissions. Open submissions only gives people maybe a week or two to make their submissions, then only has a week or two to hear them, and then a week or two to consider them, and then the bill has to be reported back to the House. How on earth is that going to actually allow for due, proper consideration and a depth of thought to go into that process? It's not. Basically, what this House, if we pass this resolution, what this House is saying to the committee is actually, don't worry too much about the process. The outcome's been predetermined. The government already knows what it wants to do. It is simply going through the motions of sending this to a select committee, but we don't actually expect it to change because we're not going to give you sufficient time to run a proper process so that errors in the bill or improvements might be identified, and the people who actually have expertise have an opportunity to have a say. The government don't want the committee to have that ability, and I think that that's a very, very bad message for them to send. This is quite an important issue, and it is one where we have offered cooperation to the government by supporting the substance of the bill, but we are very concerned about the process, and our support for the bill, of course, is maybe, potentially, contingent on the outcome of the next part of the process. And if that next part of the process is rushed, that may well compromise the level of support the bill gets for the remaining stages as it progresses through the House. Because if we don't think that people have had an adequate chance to look at the bill in detail, to consider where improvements might need to be made, then we might not necessarily support the bill through the remaining stages. So it's quite a serious issue. It is not something that we have seen. I think that this is, only the second time since the standing orders were changed that the House has been asked to consider a motion like this. maybe possibly the third Trevor Mallard is suggesting. One slipped through that we didn't debate because it was the first time. But this is uncommon. It is not common practice in this House, and it is not to be encouraged. So I think it is important that the House take some time, as we have been doing this evening, to actually examine whether there's good cause in every case where this is put forward, whether or not there is good cause for a truncated process and for overriding the rights of members of Parliament to fully participate in the processes of the House. I don't think, on my reading of the bill, that there is. And I'm very disappointed that in moving this resolution, the government did not put forward a case for doing so. I think that's really important. If the government is going to move a shortened process, it is incumbent on the minister doing so to at least, even if it's only a few sentences, to at least give some explanation of why they think the process should be shortened. And yet we got absolutely nothing at all from the minister who moved the amendment, who moved the procedural motion. So there's no justification for truncating this process. The government haven't even bothered trying to assert one. So the Labour Party will certainly be opposing this procedural motion.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.